I did my social psychology paper around you on the Roe v. Wade court case that was recently brought back to light in the United States. The Roe v. Wade case is a case that involves abortion within the United States. This court case was recently overturned in favor of banning abortion in many states in America. This caused an outrage with many women and men in America, and they were protesting for weeks before and after the overturning of the court case. I decided to insert some pictures of protests that were happening at the Capitol in order to further show how upset these men and women were. The next picture I show is the Supreme Court board. These are the men and women who made the executive decision to overturn this court case, banning abortion in America. They stripped women of all of their human rights. We no longer have a choice over whether or not we can abort a child in America. Many states are still implicating abortions as an option for women, but many states are not. There's a distinction between red and blue states. One of the major psychological concepts I mentioned in my paper was groupthink. Groupthink is the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or an individual responsibility. This is a reoccurring idea within the judicial system in America in many cases. When one person brings up an idea, many others tend to piggyback on this idea. In many cases, one person will say something and it will spread like wildfire, especially nowadays in the media. Due to social media, there has been many cases of groupthink where people tend not to have their own personal ideologies anymore. This happens in the judicial system a lot due to one person having an idea and everyone else agreeing. This brings us into my next psychological concept, which was group polarization. Group polarization is when members of a delivery reading group move towards a more extreme point in whatever direction is indicated by the members' pre-deliberation tendency. Polarization leads to changing attitudes among individuals within the group. I think this relates to the Roe v. Wade case due to the extreme sides of for the overturning of Roe v. Wade and against the overturning of Roe v. Wade. This decision was very controversial, and there were obvious divisions in opinions nationwide. Overall, group polarization is very damaging to our society due to the polar opposites of opinions, causing outrage and outbreak of violence in America. This brings me to my next psychological concept that I talked about, which was majority influence. This is when the beliefs held by a larger number of individuals in a current social group prevail. I think this is what women were hoping for, in the hopes that we were going to get a choice over what we can do with our body. Unfortunately, this was not the case due to abortion being banned in many states and women being stripped of their rights at the hands of men. Women in this country have been fighting for their own individual rights for many, many years. In many cases, people believe that this is a huge step back for equal rights in America, and I have to agree. Some states are still allowing abortion to be legal, but as I mentioned in my paper, many women below the poverty line do not have the money or the means to be able to travel to these states in order to get an abortion performed. This can be extremely dangerous due to the fact that they would have to perform one on their own. My fourth and final psychological concept was thoughtful message processing. Thoughtful message processing occurs when we think about how the message relates to our own beliefs and goals, and involves our careful consideration of whether the persuasion attempt was valid or invalid. I think the Supreme Court judges used this method in making the decision on whether or not to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. They all, as individuals, used and processed their own beliefs and opinions to make a group decision on what the right decision would be. In my personal opinion, I would have kept the decision to keep women's rights under their own control. Due to all the outrage and protesting, many women did not agree with what was happening and therefore used their voices to make it known to the Supreme Court that they did not agree with their decision. Finally, I talked about how we can help the women in need during this time. We can't go back in time and change what happened, but we can move forward by doing everything in our power to take back the rights that have been stripped away from us. Some examples of things that we could do in order to help women would be to donate to abortion or women's charities. We could also peacefully protest along with signing petitions in order to have our voices heard. As I mentioned earlier, many women around the United States are struggling financially and will not be able to obtain an abortion safely and legally. Therefore, donating to abortion clinics and women's charities will be extremely beneficial in helping these women get an abortion and the rights that they deserve. Overall, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, but if we all come together and try to fight for the rights that were taken, I think that eventually we will be able to regain these rights and have abortion become legal again in the United States. Many doctors are implicating abortion practices in their offices, and if they're in a restricted state, they say to begin by having a strong referral plan. So if you do need this, there are options.